The Big Ideas platform is a thought leadership initiative that's been developed by the School of Politics, Policy and Governance, which is an unconventional school that's designed to attract, develop, and also produce a new generation of political leaders who will listen and serve the new class of citizens who know their rights. The Big Ideas platform aims to promote dialogue, collaboration, and action to address the present challenges faced by African communities.
Welcome to the Big Ideas Platform podcast. On this episode of the Big Ideas Platform podcast, we speak with Andrew Nevin, a renowned economist, thought leader, and he's also the inaugural director of the Brainomics venture at the Center for Brain Health at the University of Texas in Dallas, the United States. Mr. Nevin holds a PhD in economics from Harvard University, a master's in philosophy, politics, and economics from Oxford University, that's in the UK, and also a bachelor's degree in computer science and mathematics from Western University in Canada. With years of experience as partner and chief economist at PwC in Nigeria, he's been at the forefront of economic thought across Africa. Now, his big idea centers on the economic value of brain health, exploring how investing in cognitive well-being can drive individuals flourishing in national productivity. Now, his work under the Brainomics initiative is reshaping how we understand the intersection between neuroscience and economic development, making a powerful case for brain health as a core pillar of inclusive growth and public policy. Mr. Nevin, thank you so much for joining us on this edition of the Big Ideas Platform podcast. Welcome.
Thank you, Camry. Thank you for such a kind introduction. It's great to be with you today.
It's a pleasure. It's an absolute pleasure. Right, so let's get straight into it. Now, brain health isn't a topic we often hear discussed when we're talking about productivity and national development. So I think that's a good place to start. What is brain health?
Well, everyone understands everything that you do at every moment is a result of your brain and how your brain functions. And too many of us don't think about how the brain works or knows much about how the brain works. So what we're trying to do is bring some neuroscience to all of these questions. And now I've moved from Nigeria. I mean, I retired from PwC in 2023, and I moved to the University of Texas at Dallas Center for Brain Health. So I spend my time thinking about the impact of brain health and brain performance on the economy. And our mission is to teach people how to use their brains better, how to keep peak performance for as long as possible. And that'll make your life better, but it'll also make the economy better.
Now, there are quite a few Africans where if you make a reference to their mental state of minds, again, I don't want to go to the word mental, we attach certain stigmas to words like that. So when you talk about brain health, as you talked about, and I said the brain is responsible for everything we do, I understand that. What's the difference between brain health and the other sides that I've just referred to, mental health? Are they one and the same? How do they differ?
They're not the same. I mean, brain health is a more expansive concept that includes everything that your brain is able to do functionally. I mean, the way we look at it at the Center for Brain Health is we look at brain health in three major dimensions. One is connectedness to people and purpose, one is clarity, and one is emotional balance. What people typically think of as mental health is a subset of emotional balance, and it's certainly important. But our main focus is actually around improving people's clarity of their thinking, clarity of their cognition. And it's not about diagnosis. We don't at the Center for Brain Health give people labels. What we do is focusing on them having their brain simply perform better. And if your brain is performing better, your life is going to go better.
Interesting. So what sparked your interest in this area? I'm looking at an economist, and here you are having a conversation with me about brain health. So what sparks the interest in this area? And should we all be paying attention to brain health?
Well, let me answer the second question first. Everyone should be paying attention to brain health. I mean, everyone has a brain. As I said, everything that you do is dependent on your brain functioning well. And what we find is once people take an interest in brain health, or we actually prefer the term in many cases, brain performance, is your brain performing well? Once you take an interest in it and understand it, you'll be doing that for the rest of your life, and you will benefit from it, and those around you will benefit. You know, how I got involved in this, it goes back to the great financial crisis. I joined PwC in the UK at that time. I ended up writing the global perspective on the financial crisis and what happened. And that led me thinking, and I hadn't been using my economics. I'd been in the private sector. I'd left my PhD back in '89 and been in the private sector for 20 years without using economics. When I came back to economics, I realized there were some fundamental issues with it, and I started getting involved in the concept of flourishing. So we tend to think of the economy doing well as high GDP growth. I wrote a book with a co-author actually arguing that what the economy is there for is to help people flourish. And then as I explored more the idea of flourishing, it led me to the ideas around if you're going to flourish, your brain has to be working well. So where's a logical place to think about your brain working well? It's at a neuroscience center. So that's what led me from being the PwC chief economist in Nigeria. After retiring from that post, I became a professor at the Center for Brain Health at the University of Texas at Dallas.
Interesting. Ms. Nevin, you've got the benefit of having experienced two very, very diverse cultures, two very, very diverse ways of living and doing things from an economist perspective. Your time, as you said, PwC here in Nigeria. Now you are in.
Well, I have more, more diversity than that. I mean, I lived for 10 years in China as well. My
Oh.
wife is of Indian origin, so I have, I'm Canadian, not even American. So I have lots of touch points that give me diverse perspectives, and it's been an important part of my life. So
I can imagine. You sound like the proverbial citizen of planet Earth. Indeed, that's how you come across. Interesting. All right, I'd like you to talk to us now about brain health, how we think, how we process the choices we make, and so on and so forth. I'd like you to talk to us about the connection between that and the challenge in many African communities. That's good governance and development. What's the correlation there? Can you talk to us about that?
Well, let me start with a couple of foundational concepts that are really critical. I mean, the first foundational concept that everyone has to understand is something called neuroplasticity. So you mentioned that I did my first degree in computer science and mathematics. When I was doing this degree in the 1970s, and you would go to the student pub to have a beer, everyone at your table would remind you that every beer you had destroyed 10,000 neurons, and
Oh, yeah.
you couldn't get them back. And we all remember that story. And it turns out that is completely false. In fact, the brain is the most modifiable part of the body, and it's changing every moment of your life. And of course, we can regenerate neurons. We understand that now with neurogenesis. We have the brain changing at all stages of life, at all ages of life, and it changes from everything that you do. So there are external things that you do that affect your brain. Of course, we just discussed nutrition, physical exercise, interacting with other people. Things like the way you breathe. So, for example, for those listening today that are familiar with yoga, there's certain breathing patterns. I mean, those are not by accident. In fact, they have an impact on the way that your brain performs. So your brain performance is something that's changing every moment of your life on that. And then it also changes from what you do internally, the way you think. If you ruminate, for example, on things unnecessarily, that will damage the way the way your brain functions. So, a lot of training is around improving the way you use your brain. So that you have this concept of neuroplasticity that's really critical. The second foundational concept that's really important is what we call self-agency, that the things that affect how your brain performs are under your control. I mean, obviously with the nutrition for a child is not totally under the child's control, but for adults, generally, hopefully what they eat, what they do, the physical activity they do, but also how they use their brain, the way they approach solving problems is something they have control over on that. So it's very important to realize if you have neuroplasticity and self-agency and you combine those things, the term that we use at the Center for Brain Health is you are the architect of your own brain. So the way that your brain functions is not totally, but very much it's under your control. And what we're trying to do is teach people how to use their brain better so they make better decisions. They are better able to solve complex problems. They're better able to connect with other people. They're better able to emotionally regulate kind of the normal ups and downs of life and kind of the resilience types of questions. So those foundations are really critical. Now you come back to what you said. I mean, it's very interesting from the science perspective on it. Empathy, it turns out, and we have, sorry, let me make one other comment. When I say the brain works better, it works better in kind of a functional sense. But then you might be asking yourself the question, or should be asking yourself the question, that's all very interesting, but how does it relate to the physical brain? So what's the relationship between what's happening physically, because the brain is a physical organ, and the functional things you do in your life? We have two functional MRIs, magnetic resonance imagers, in our shop, and of course there's more, many places do the same thing. So there's lots of evidence that shows when you improve the way your brain functions, you're also, it's correlated with physical improvements in the brain. So particularly things like blood flow, white matter integrity. So white matter is what connects different parts of the brain. It's very important that it works well. So for example, multiple sclerosis is a disease where that white matter, the myelin, starts to break down and doesn't work well. And we know the consequences of that. And so, but to go back to the issue that you raised, Camry, I mean, it's true. It's absolutely true from a scientific viewpoint that someone that has less empathy, their brain is not functioning as well. And empathy, when you're able to, and because it's a complex problem-solving issue, empathy, you're able to project yourself into someone else's situation, think about it from their perspective. That is going back to this idea of neuroplasticity. That changes how your brain works. You're solving a complex problem. Every time you solve a complex problem, it makes more connections between, I think it's 85 billion neurons that you have in your brain and trillions of potential connections. When you make those connections, it makes your brain stronger on that. So someone who doesn't have empathy, doesn't learn the skill of empathy, is going to find their brain does not function as well. And then, as you say, if you end up with leaders, whether it's an African context or any other geography around the world, leaders who don't have empathy, you're not likely to get good decision making or good governance.
Let me ask this other question. What are some of the biggest threats to optimal brain health in our modern environment here in Africa?
Yeah, so let me go back to what I said before is we're very focused at the Center for Brain Health on how you use your brain. So what we do is we teach people how to use your brain better. And we don't label people, as I said, we're not really focused on mental health, for example, so people shouldn't be concerned about that. What we do is, if you go back to the concept of self-agency, you need to understand how your own brain works. You need to know a little bit of neuroscience. There's no way for us to just tell you what to do, because then you don't have a context for it. So all of our programs are based around that simple principle that you teach people how their brain works, and then you teach them some consequences of it and how to use that in their daily lives. So let me give a few practical examples of this that we use with different populations. And we use this with adolescents, we use it with corporations, we use it a lot with the elite military. So for example, the special ops groups like the Navy SEALs of the United States are people we work with on that. There's a school in Dallas that teaches kids how their brain works at age 3. So this is becoming kind of more and more widespread. But let me start with one that is really a problem in the Nigerian groups that I worked with on that, the idea of multitasking. So everyone in Nigeria, multiple phones. I mean, my boss, when I arrived in Nigeria, I think had 7 phones. You're kind of course, caught in traffic. You've got different phones ringing, different people pinging you on different modalities. So you've got some people on email, some people by text message, some people by WhatsApp, for example. Um, and we all, at least we used to 5 years ago, pride ourselves on multitasking. In fact, people would put it on their resume, great multitasker.
Yeah.
Well, it turns out when you study the neuroscience of this, the brain cannot multitask. The brain can only actually do one task at a time. So when you say you're multitasking, what you're really doing is doing a little bit of a task and then stopping that task and switching to another task. You do a little bit or complete that task, but then you still have to go back to the first task and complete it. So what's happening in the brain? Well, every time you switch tasks, there's a neural load. It's you're draining the energy out of your brain on that. So in fact, if you think about that, it's less efficient to do half a task, use the neural energy to switch to another task, do that task, and then use neural energy to switch back to the first task and try to complete that. So the first thing we teach people is stop multitasking. And I can tell you, if you stop multitasking, your productivity, your efficiency will go up. Whether you're in the government or in the corporate world or NGO world on that. And so, how do you do that? Well, you do a few things. One is you turn off the notifications on your devices. Because again, if you're working on an important email or you're working on an important
Yeah.
document for a meeting that comes up, you've got your phone beside you. the phone pings up with some notification, you're distracted, you move that, you've now spent the neural energy to follow up on that distraction, answer that notification or email or text or WhatsApp message, come back to the task that you're doing. That is all very draining. And what we find, all the scientific evidence, is that people that engage in chronic multitasking, I mean, what they're doing is basically burning out their brain on that. They have increased levels of cortisol over time. The neural health declines, their efficiency declines. They find that by 4 p.m. or 5 p.m., they have no energy left. So a very practical starting point is stop multitasking.
Interesting. Interesting, that one.
And again,
Okay.
so that you go back to what you were worried about. We talk about brain health, brain performance. People,
Yeah.
you said, isn't this a mental health thing? I mean, this multitasking example is just not about mental health. It's about performance of your brain to work as well as it can in your context.
Interesting. All right, we'll go on a quick break. And when we return, Andrew will talk to us about the Brain Health Project. What's it all about? More of this when we return.
The Big Ideas Platform is a thought leadership initiative that's been developed by the School of Politics, Policy and Governance, which is an unconventional school that's designed to attract, develop, and also produce a new generation of political leaders who will listen and serve the new class of citizens who know their rights. The Big Ideas Platform aims to promote dialogue, collaboration, and action to address the present challenges faced by African communities.
Right, welcome back to the Big Ideas Platform podcast. My name is Camry, and I'm here sitting in conversation with Andrew and Nevin. We're talking about brain health. Tell us more about the Brain Health Project. What is it, and what are you seeing? What are the patterns and markers you're discovering so far that predicts better brain outcomes? Talk to us about that.
Well, let me start by describing something called the Framingham study. So this was something that was begun in, I think, the early 1950s in Framingham, Massachusetts. And what the study did was follow people's heart health. So it looked at people's lifestyle behaviors and then the outcomes for heart health. So, for example, cardiac arrest, heart attacks, etc., strokes. And it was the first study of its kind that really gave us an insight into what impacted heart health. And an obvious thing that came out of that study is smoking was not good for your heart. In fact, it's terrible for your heart. Obesity was not good for your heart. Exercise was good for your heart on that. So the Framingham study, which still goes on today, has been instrumental in revolutionizing heart health. And people, I mean, most people, and certainly educated Nigerians, the one listening to this podcast, are aware of their heart health. And even if they don't always follow what they should be doing, they're aware of it. They know they should exercise. They know they shouldn't smoke. They know they need some movement. They know they need less stress on that. So the Brain Health Project is the same thing as the Framingham study did for the heart for the brain. So what we're doing is tracking people over at least a 10-year period where we measure their brain health and measure what they're doing in their life and starting to draw out some of the correlations between that. And we've got about 15,000 people have actually gone through and started to engage with it. And the way it works is when you enter, and everyone listening to this can do the Brain Health Project. Now, because it's a research project, I can't tell you on this podcast that it will benefit you. But I will say that everyone that thinks more about their brain tends to, no one regrets thinking more or knowing more about their brain. But the way the project works is you start out by doing an assessment on your brain health. So this is a set of psychometric tests. Earlier, I used 3 dimensions: clarity, emotional balance, and connectedness to people and purpose. So it will test those things with a series of questions. The clarity thinking really focuses on the way you use your cognition or your ability to think, and not just at a surface level, but at a deep level to be able to, create connections between ideas on that. And the thing about our measurement in those 3 dimensions is there's no upward ceiling. So this is not, I mean, if you do, for example, if you went to the doctor and the doctor thought you had Parkinson's, they do a very simple cognitive test where you count backwards from 100 by 7. But that doesn't, that is a very easy test for most people, including those who have Parkinson's. But it doesn't measure your upward potential in terms of the way you use your brain. So the way our test works is it really stretches you to kind of engage your higher order thinking processes, or what we call executive function. The other thing about the test is we don't tell you your score versus others. So when we think about brain health and brain performance, what we want people to think about is you versus you. So I'm sure that your listeners have this idea in their mind that after 30 or 40, certainly that their brain will go into decline. We we disagree with that based on the scientific evidence. In fact, your brain can work as well at 70 as it can at 30 if you do the right things. But the purpose of the Brain Health Project measurement is that you do a brain health index. You then engage with some of our training assets to teach you how, again, as I said a little earlier before the break, how your brain actually works. So it teaches you some neuroscience. You don't have to read the scientific papers. We summarize them for you, but you need to, as I said, know some neuroscience, some consequences of that. So for example, there's a whole section, like I talked about before the break, on multitasking and why multitasking doesn't work and how it damages the brain and damages the cognitive processes. So you engage with the training assets for a period, and then you take the brain health index again. And you see, is your brain going forwards or backwards? And of course, we want people who for the brains to get better. And what we find is that if people engage in learning about their brain, whether it's with our assets or other ways to learn about the brain, once they know more about the brain and the consequences, they tend to do better on the brain health index, and they're performing better. So that's the nature of it.
Well, you're very right there, especially with the last thing you said. How early can you start focusing on brain health with children? You talk
3 years old,
about
3 years old. And then with our own program, which focuses on the adolescents, we've got more and more evidence that when they learn how their brain works, and we've particularly focused at that age on cognition, metacognition, so how to solve complex problems, how to regulate information intake, structure it. But we just find they do better. So we would say start at age 3, continue at age 10, reinforce at high school. We're also doing more and more programs with colleges and universities. And the university that we're attached to, which is University of Texas at Dallas, is now moving towards becoming the world's first brain healthy campus. So how do you teach? You start with freshmen. They arrive on campus. They've obviously got through high school, but now the demands at university are much higher. They're very stressed. How do you teach them, or what do you teach them about their brain so they'll perform better on that? And we're rolling out more and more programming around that. So the question is at every age. And then you might say, well, if it's only for young people, what happens to older people? Well, I myself, so I joined the Center for Brain Health after I retired from Nigeria. I was 60 years old. I didn't know anything about neuroscience. I've learned a huge amount about how the brain works, and then I've incorporated that the way I do my work and daily activities. And my brain is performing better now than it did in my 40s.
Wow. Well, that's certainly encouraging for a lot of people out there. Never too late to learn. Now, because you are familiar with Nigeria, if brain health were prioritized in our neck of the woods, in the Nigerian society, or by extension, African society, what kind of society do you think we could end up building if we prioritize brain health?
Well, let me start out by saying one of the things about brain health and flourishing that's really critical is this idea that connectedness to people is really one of the foundations. And in the flourishing literature, there's actually there's a big study between Harvard, Baylor, and Gallup going on, global study, and it's measuring flourishing in 22 different countries, including Nigeria. Their first results are out, and many times in Nigeria, we're used to being at the bottom of the league table or close to the bottom. But in fact, in the way the flourishing index, the Harvard flourishing index numbers have come out here, and Nigeria is near the top of the table. Which is really interesting, and I can share with your listeners, or share with you, so you can share with your listeners later some of the references to that. Now, what's the underlying reason for that? Well, I mean, they're all the challenge. I know, one of the things that was very important to me when I was in Nigeria was I never went on television and talked about the challenges in Nigeria, because I used to say, we all understand the challenges. There's no point in me standing up and reiterating them. What I talked about were the solutions and the kind of the positive things happening in the country. And actually, in Nigeria, wrote the book Self-Organizing Niger to talk about the positive things. So in this context, we would like to see more organized. For example, NYSC, you could offer every NYSC person an online course that taught them about their brain. I mean, there's essentially no cost to it, right? We've created all the online learning modules on it, so it's essentially free to bring it to other groups, and that would make a huge difference. But the great thing about Nigeria is as I said, one of the three core components of brain health and performance is connectedness to people. And in Nigeria, that dimension is much stronger than many other places, including the United States. So the potential for very strong brain health and brain performance is absolutely there. I mean, there's more and more evidence. I mean, people I'm sure have heard about epidemic of loneliness. I think the number I have in my head for the scientific research on this is 26% of Americans are clinically lonely, which has a definition around whether you have someone to talk to kind of about critical issues. That's, an appalling statistics. And loneliness, it turns out, has an incredible impact on brain performance and a kind of a negative spiral impact. I mean, you're lonely, you don't perform, your brain is not performing, the brain degrades, you're more lonely, and you spin out of control. It has an economic impact in terms of productivity, and of course, an immense human impact. So, for example, I think that being lonely increases your likelihood of getting Alzheimer's by about 45%, if I remember the literature correctly. But as I said, in Nigeria, you already have this very strong connectedness to people dimension in the society. So I think if we added in other brain health concepts and teachings in schools and NYSC and in organized corporations, I think it could be, a really brain healthy society. It would have immense benefits in terms of human outcomes, HCI kind of outcomes, but also economic outcomes. So I've always been, those who've listened to me over the years, I'm optimistic about Nigeria. As I said, I don't pay much attention to the bad news we all already know. Let's focus on the strengths. And in this case, the fact that the connectedness dimension is so strong in Nigerian society is an amazing strength for brain health and performance for the population.
So as we wrap up our conversation, which we'll hope will serve as a catalyst for further action. So as near the end of the conversation, I'd like you to speak to any number of innovators, idea generators, policymakers, or even members of the public who have an interest in following further the conversation we've just had about brain health.
Well, I just would I think the easiest entry point to start thinking about brain health and brain performance is our brain health project, as you said. It said it's free, it's easy. People that take a genuine interest will, as they do the assessment, the brain health index, and follow some of the training assets. What we find, it's like anything in life. I mean, there's some people that start something and stop. But we have thousands of people. Out of the 15,000 people that started, we probably have 5 or 6,000 that have done at least 2 or 3 brain health indices. They're on their brain health journey. They're not going to stop. So I would like as many people listening today to think about starting their brain health journey. And for the ones that get interested in 6, 9 months from now, they could start thinking about, well, does this apply to my organization? So maybe you're the CEO or in the C-suite of a big company. You've done the brain health project. You've done an index or 2 indices. You've done some of the training assets. Say this is applicable to my organization. So we would like those sorts of influencers who start their own brain health journey and find it valuable to then come back to us and say, all right, how do I now bring these assets to the wider group that I influence? I mean, we have a very clear strategy here, which is the way to improve brain health and brain performance is for people who have a sphere of influence to get involved with it themselves, because then it becomes credible and they understand. And then within their sphere of influence, how do they bring brain health assets into it to make a difference whether it's their community, their company, their government, et cetera. So that's where I'd like people to start. Try the Brain Health Project. Reach out to me. I answer everyone, but particularly people from Nigeria. I mean, I'm still very connected to Nigeria. I'm on a number of boards of both private company of for-profit companies and NGOs, and of course, big part of SPPG. So try the Brain Health Project. And if it's something that you think is valuable for you or for your organization, reach out to me. We'll talk about how to make that happen.
Speaking of which, at this point, I'll ask you to put out your social media details, how people can reach out to you, as well as the flourishing table you talked about. Is there a place where we can access the report?
My social media is very much focused on LinkedIn. I have thousands of connections in Nigeria. So if you put Andrew Nevin, type in, I'm sure we have a mutual connection. I will connect to any Nigerian on that. So that's the best way to reach me. Anyone that writes to me a message on LinkedIn, I will always respond. As I said, the first place I'm going to point you to on your brain health journey is the Brain Health Project on that. But I want to get into a dialogue about brain health and what it means for Nigeria. I will share the links for the Harvard Flourishing Project, the Harvard Baylor Gallup Flourishing Project that shows Nigeria doing, better than we would expect on the Flourishing Index, and we can take it from there.
Fantastic. Andrew Nevin is the inaugural director of the Brainomics venture at the Center for Brain Health at the University of Texas in Dallas. And he's been sharing his big idea with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Henry. It's been great to be with you today. And as I said a little bit earlier, the SPPG is the most amazing organization. It's going to have an enormous positive impact on Nigeria and Africa and the world.
The Big Ideas Platform is a thought leadership initiative that's been developed by the School of Politics, Policy and Governance, which is an unconventional school that's designed to attract, develop and also produce a new generation of political leaders who will listen and serve the new class of citizens who know their rights. The Big Ideas Platform aims to promote dialogue, collaboration and action to address the present challenges faced by African communities.